I think there's a little bit of a misconception about the 180 degree rule, as I see people leave this comment on some of my videos and people talk about this online, and people talk about it on set. The 180 degree rule typically a lot of times gets applied to your shutter speed and how a lot of people talk about it, which if you look up 180 degree shutter angle, this is a thing. This is important. In fact, these are some of the videos I've done on the topic that people seem to enjoy. There's also some charts here that you can look at explaining 180 degree shutter angle. There's even a Wikipedia page. There's some videos. Hey, there's one of mine. Shutter Angle Explained. You can go watch that. That's an older one, but still, I think, valuable. I think a lot of cameras should have shutter angle built in. The GH5 does. Film cinema cameras do. The S1H does, but Sony seems to not think it's all that important for the A7S III, which I really wish it were included, but shutter angle is apparently not a feature at release on the A7S III. But 180 degree shutter angle isn't the 180 degree rule. People like to say or think that it is, maybe because it's very easy to get confused about it, because there is a 180 degree rule. But the 180 degree rule is something different. The 180 degree rule is for shooting and making sure that you're always on the right side for when you're cutting content together. So if you went to film school, this should be taught in most classes, but I think on the internet and in videos, it can get confusing because people always talk about 180 degree shutter angle being really, really important. I'm one of those people. I think it is very important. Making sure that you're basically shooting with a 180 degree shutter as you're changing your frame rate is important to make sure that you have good motion blur and that it's pleasing to look at. But the 180 degree rule is about your subjects and where your actors are. So there is no rule for the shutter angle. It's not a rule that you have to use 180 degree shutter angle. It's not a rule. You can break it if you want. There's good reason to break it. Shoot with a 90 degree shutter angle. Shoot with a 360 degree shutter angle. You can break that rule all you want. The 180 degree rule is much more of an important rule. It can be broken intentionally, but you should only break it intentionally. If you break it unintentionally, your footage is going to look really weird when you cut it together. So basically, you always want to stay on a 180 degree arc side of your actors or your subject, because if you switch to go to the other side of that arc, to the other opposite 180 degree, now you get an inverse of what you're filming, which kind of throws everything out of perspective when you're cutting different scenes around. Actors and objects are changing orientation because you broke the 180 degree rule. And if you've ever seen this happen, it is rather jarring if you watch some films do it accidentally, where an actor will basically pop up in the same spot as the previous actor because they didn't follow the 180 degree rule, and both actors are on the same side of the frame, but they're talking to each other. You want back and forth, right, between your actors, so that like one's on this side and then you cut to the next shot and they're on and the other actor's on this side, and it looks like they're looking at each other through the way your brain processes information. If you don't do that, they just pop up on the same side and it looks like they're both looking the same direction at the same thing, but they're talking to each other. It's very disorienting. So it is a rule for good reason. It provides continuity and consistency with perspective so that you're not confusing your audience. So that's why it's a rule, and it's really important. But it has nothing to do with shutter angle, even though that also should be 180 degrees. And in general, it's good to treat it as if it is a rule, but it's not a rule that you can't break. And that's why I wanted to make this video, just to talk through this stuff, because they're easily interchangeable in the way people talk, because people use shorthand and are you following the 180 degree rule with your shutter? I'm like, well, yeah, sure, I am. But like, also we need to make sure we're following the real 180 degree rule about where we're filming from, so we're not on opposite sides shooting at each other, getting weird opposing shots. It just throws your whole perspective out of place. So I don't know that there's a better way to talk about it, because they're both 180 degree angle, and shutter angle should be more adopted and embraced. There's still people to this day who are discovering it for the first time going, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever, because shutter speed is different. Shutter angle is what you want if you're making video or film or any kind of cinematography. Shutter speed is a photography thing, and people have adapted shutter speed rules to mimic the 180-degree shutter angle, but it's just nice when it's built right into the camera. So again, cameras like the GH5, the S1H, the Blackmagic cameras that are cinema cameras, most higher-end cameras will allow you to do 180-degree shutter angle. But there's quite a few hybrid photography cameras that don't have shutter angle as a feature, in which case I think that's where people get tripped up. They start learning about shutter angle and 180 degrees. So you mean 180th shutter speed? It's like, no, that's not 180 degree shutter angle. Like shutter speed, like 1 over 180 is not the same as 180 degrees. It technically would be if you were shooting 90 frames a second, but that's where it gets into all the math and all the breakdown, and you're basically multiplying by a half. 1 over your frame rate times 1 over your half gives you your shutter speed equivalent of what 180 degree would be. And the reason that is because 180 is half of 360. A lot of math involved. Hopefully you know this stuff. If you don't, definitely look it up so you can understand it a little bit better. But no, this is the real 180 degree rule, and it has nothing to do with shutter speed or shutter angle for that matter.